9th of January, 1941. Thin snow on the fields at Willow Run. Charles Sorensen stands alone among survey stakes and tire ruts, Ford's plant manager, dragging the toe of his shoe through the crust and marking where a wall should run. He wants to build B-24 Liberators the way Ford builds cars. A moving line, timed stations, master jigs that fix shape so men do not guess. The war clock is loud and the money is public, so failure will be fast and seen. He pictures wings and fuselages arriving in order because only order beats time. The promise is simple and hard. A bomber every 63 minutes, or he falls short. He starts by looking at how others build the B-24 now. In the bays he sees crews stand around a single airframe for weeks, each group waiting for the one before to clear. Fitters drill and ream until a hole accepts a bolt. Shims hide small sins. It works for a few planes, but the weights eat days, and the fits depend on the same men being there tomorrow. He decides the airplane must be broken into pieces that can move, because motion is the only way to keep time. So he lists the big parts: center wing, outer wings, fuselage barrels, tail, nacelles, gear, systems, and skins. He writes single flow at the top of a sheet, one path from first rivet to test stand. If everything moves forward, delays will have nowhere to hide. Therefore, each station must finish within a fixed block of minutes. He draws boxes for stations and writes the minutes inside. He knows that if a station cannot meet the time, the line will back up and the clock will show it. That is the point. Flow will expose trouble while it is still small and near the cause, so he can fix it with training, tools, or steps, not with speeches. A straight line would be simple, but the site and the walls will not allow it. The building must fit the field, and the line must fit the building. He sketches a long path that bends because a mile of straight floor is not there. He tries angles, then arcs, until the bend keeps pace without forcing a stop. Jigs will ride on dollies, and tow tractors will pull the airframes around the curve. Therefore, the fixtures must guide parts true even when turning. He adds floor slots for tow bars, and marks where a plane's tail will swing so that it does not hit columns when it rounds the corner. The parts must behave like they are the same every time, so he orders master jigs and gauges for each major piece. Big steel frames will hold the center section to the right angle. Locator pins will set holes before a drill touches metal. Go-no-go gauges will tell a man in a second if a flange or a spar cap is within limits. If every hole and edge matches the master, then parts made in different shops will meet on the line without fuss. Therefore, fitting on the line will be rare. He asks for duplicate masters because if one is damaged, the whole chain would freeze. He knows the cost is high, but a jammed line costs more. He pulls in Albert Kahn's team and lays the path over their first floor plan. Cranes must be where lifts happen, not where the roof happens to be strong, so he asks for steel to carry the cranes where he needs them. He places pit lines in the floor for gear retraction tests and wiring runs, because working at waist height saves time and backs. Doors must be wide and tall at the ends of subassembly shops, so a finished wing can roll out nose first to the main line without a truck or a delay. He checks crane reach against the stations with a scale. Therefore, when a center section arrives, the hook can pick it in a single swing and not waste minutes repositioning. He goes station by station with a stopwatch and a pencil. He breaks each job into simple steps that a new worker can learn in days, because he knows many of his future hands have never seen a bomber and may never have worked in a plant. He writes down the order in which holes are drilled, rivets are set, and sealant is applied. He chooses tools that are light, repeatable, and hard to misuse. Therefore, torque wrenches with fixed settings and drill bushings that sit in the jigs. He labels bins with colored tags for fasteners, so a man does not pause to decode a part number. He times again, trims motion, and fixes the steps to the station minutes until the list and the clock agree. At the planning table, he fixes the beat. One finished bomber every 63 minutes is not just a boast, it is the rhythm that will drive the whole plant. Therefore, the upstream shops must feed finished subassemblies to the main line on that same beat, with buffers small enough to show pain but big enough to catch a bad hour. He maps where wing panels will come from, how many rivet guns each panel crew will need, and how carts will move without crossing paths. He sets up duplicate tool rooms and mirror image lines for critical parts, because a broken fixture or a stalled press cannot be allowed to own the day. He knows one missing engine or a late spar can stop everyone, so he writes second sources into the schedule and orders spares before the first tool wears. The Army wants eyes on his drawings, so he lets them in early. Acceptance at the end will depend on specs at the start, therefore change must be tight and recorded. If Consolidated revises a rib or a fuel line, that change must move through his jigs, gauges, and work cards without confusion. So he asks for a single number on each drawing set, and a rule that nothing moves to the floor until that number is cleared. He draws a small room beside the line for inspectors with gauges of their own. He accepts their stamps, because a pass at the end starts with a pass at each station. It is slower at first, but he can see that slow on paper is faster than scrap in metal. When the path and the minutes and the lifts all line up, he faces the last choice. He must sign off on a flow that exists only in drawings and chalk lines, because the building is still steel and mud. If the math is wrong, the failure will not be quiet. The line will jam in public, and the war clock will not care why. He reads the numbers again, feels the weight of the beat he has set, and writes his name. He knows that from this point, change is possible but costly. He also knows that only a hard plan can force a hard pace, therefore he accepts the risk in full view. He hires by the thousand because the line he drew on paper needs hands to make it real. He signs off on a training school inside a long shed and asks for mock stations that copy the real ones in wood and scrap metal. He breaks every job into one small motion that a new worker can learn in days. He stands in the aisle and watches first classes on practice fixtures. When he sees a pause, he changes the step card so the next group does not stop at the same point. Minutes are the test, so the school keeps time. He wants people who have never seen a factory to have a fair start, so he writes work cards with plain words and pictures. He tells the staff to use arrows and shaded parts instead of shop talk. Women come with soft shoes and careful hands. Men arrive from farms, mines, and towns from the south. He asks the tool team to set benches to adjustable height, because backs will not meet his schedule if the work is too low or too high. He picks light tools that stop at a preset torque, so results match even when wrists do not. The fields have no streetcars, so he needs wheels. He arranges buses from Detroit and Ypsilanti and circles their arrivals on a wall chart. The first week, the doors clog at start time, so he staggers shifts by the quarter hour to spread the wave. He draws new stripes on the floor and moves the clock-in posts away from the main doors, because one pause at a turnstile is a standing wave he cannot afford. Mud in the parking lot steals mornings, so he lays gravel lanes and sets men to push out stuck cars before the beat starts. The agreement with the union is new, and he knows Willow Run must follow it. He meets UAW leaders in a plain room without banners and lays out how he intends to tie job grades to station content. He brings station sheets with lists of tools, materials, and minutes. He argues that grade must follow the work, not only time in the plant, because each station must hold its pace every day. They do not accept everything, but they accept the idea that the job and the tools define the pay band. He leaves the room with a map that both sides can point to when the floor grows hot. It does grow hot. In 1942, a crew walks out of one area over classification. The men say their tasks are misgraded. He sees the line stutter and stop down the curve he built. He calls for the sheets and rechecks the content with the stewards and the foreman. He finds a mismatch between what the card says and what the crew has been asked to do. He regrades the jobs to fit the actual steps, and he does not change the beat. The pay moves, the pace does not. The crew comes back. He posts the corrected standard at the station so the next shift will not argue the memory of a word, only the paper. He has learned that personal orders, even when well-meant, make the line wobble. Foremen who change steps to please a friend or punish a slight are a hidden leak of minutes. He replaces ad hoc calls with posted standards, and he explains that the standard is the only story that counts. Men can see the chart of minutes above the work and the list of tools below it. Arguments shrink to what the paper says. When someone brings a better method, he tests it with a stopwatch, and if it passes, he changes the paper and the board. The rule is fair because it is clear. Breaks eat the beat when they are far away. He asks for cafeterias and lockers close to the work, so people do not cross the whole building for coffee or a coat. He times the walk from the station to the nearest soup line, then moves a wall and a steam table to cut the trip. He sets lockers by the stations so wet coats in winter do not follow workers to the rivet guns. By fixing the basics, food, heat, a place for a lunch pail, he makes the return to work a fact, not a guess. Winter brings new trouble. Snow and sickness make the absentee board bloom in red pins, and the beat threatens to slip. He creates a pool of backups who know 2 or 3 simple tasks and can plug holes fast. He asks the school to teach cross skills for neighboring stations, so a missing pair of hands does not stop a fuselage barrel from moving. He keeps a short list of names for each shift who can be pulled at the whistle, because a station that waits loses the minute forever. He does not like the cost, but the beat survives. Quality is not a speech, it is a path. He sets a rule that defects must go backward, not forward, even when it hurts. He knows hiding a flaw is faster in the moment, and he knows where that ends when a crew is at altitude over water. He gives a small reward and public thanks for the man who tags a bad part and sends it back. He accepts slow now so that the line does not build speed into loss later. He sees the first week's pain as stations push work back up the curve. Then he sees the flow clear as upstream jigs learn, and the red tags thin. The hardest risk comes in a dispute that flares between crafts over who owns the electrical work on a station. Sheet metal men have been pulling wires. Electricians say it is theirs. Words rise over the drone of drills. A tool hits the floor, and the station's clock runs to zero with nothing finished. He cannot move the line with that fight at its heart, so he pulls the wiring out of the station. He sets up a dedicated team upstream that builds and tests harnesses on boards, and he orders those harnesses to arrive at the station before the clock starts. The crafts keep their lines. The station gets a complete set that snaps in, and the beat resumes. He feels the cost in new boards and staff, and he accepts it because the only thing that matters to the promise he wrote is the flow that does not stop. The first planes that roll off in late 1942 do not look finished. Panels hang open. Lines dangle like loose threads. Men climb ladders with parts in their coats because the piece that should have met the holes did not. He sees the ramp fill with half-done bombers that need hours of work before they can taxi. The line he drew on paper empties early each day as foremen pull crews to the ramp to save face with the schedule. Because rework steels trained hands, the stations inside fall behind, and the beat he set slips into silence. Army inspectors do not care about the schedule. They run their fingers along skin seams and find weeping tank bays. They lay a straightedge across the wing route and see a mismatch that should not be there. He takes the hit. He orders final movement stopped for days, knowing the pause will be public. Jigs are opened and scraped clean. Master pins are gauged, reamed, then gauged again until they tell the truth. He brings crews back to the school and runs them through the first jobs with new cards that do not allow a step to be guessed. He knows that every hour spent at the source now will return 10 from the ramp later. He writes a new rule to make that return real. Defects must die where they start. He forms small traveling teams with carts of gauges, torque wrenches with fixed settings, and repair kits built from the bad parts they have seen. They station themselves at upstream points and answer red tags within minutes instead of days. When a hole pattern wanders or a flange sits high, the fixed team moves in and resets the work to the master, then signs the card so the station can keep its minutes. Because fixes stop walking to the ramp, rework space clears, and the main line learns to hold its shape. Sequence becomes the next lever. Until now, wings and fuselage have met on floor stands that fight the weight of their own parts. Gravity pulls where it wants, and shims grow to fill the gap. He changes the marriage. He orders an overhead carrier that holds the center section at the right angle and lets the wings come up under it as they will in the air. With the load hanging true, he can check dihedral and incidence with gauge blocks and sight marks before a single final hole is drilled. Men can lift and set with a slow inch-by-inch pull from above instead of prying from below. Because the mates happen under weight, fits improve, and the need for shims shrinks to the rare case. Paper has been another source of trouble. Consolidated keeps improving the model, but changes arrive at different shops on different days. Parts that look right by eye carry different numbers, and the line pays for that with surprise. He shuts the door on drift. He creates a change board with one number that governs all drawings, all jigs, and all work cards. Nothing moves to a floor unless that number is stamped at the top of every page and on the bin labels that hold the parts. If a shop shows a piece without the right number, it goes back, no matter how much it costs to make. Because the paper now matches the metal, fits at assembly stop being a guess. Engines become a new choke. Good power plants arrive with too many loose ends, so final install drags while men fit lines, cables, and shields one by one. The queue stretches and hides good work behind a single slow step. He opens a separate engine dress line with its own beat. On that path, small crews add every hose, clamp, and wire, while the engine rests at waist height. Each engine passes a small test stand, then leaves with colored tags that match the mounts on the wing. When the engine arrives at the main line, it goes on as a plug-in, not a project. Because the dress line keeps its own time, the long queue collapses into a steady trickle that the station can swallow. At the same time, he sees that rivet patterns vary by hand. He orders metal templates for each panel and head height gauges at every gun. Guns are set to one number, and heads are checked in seconds. Skin smoothness and strength rise to the spec without a fight, and the inspector's straightedges start to find less. One morning, an inspector's gauge shows a drop in fuel pressure on a plane that should pass. The line has been fragile but moving. This could break it again. He freezes the station and takes the blow. He writes a new check that sits between build and test. Every fitting on the fuel system must see a preset torque with a locked wrench. Then a second set of eyes marks the joint. Each tank bay is pressurized with colored test fluid, and a man with a light watches for any bubble at every seam. Only when the system holds for a set span of minutes does the card clear. Because the pain happens at one station, scrap drops at the end, and the inspectors' faces lose their edge. Through the winter and spring, the upstream fixes stick. The ramp stays clear enough that completed planes can move to test on the day the line says they should. Work cards no longer carry words a crew must interpret, and change numbers line up from press to paint without surprise. By June of 1944, he can see stable flow and higher acceptance. Final stations keep their minutes because the main shapes are right and the plumbing holds. The Army teams stamp passes with fewer notes, and the first flights come back with reports he can read without flinching. The beat he wrote on paper starts to sound like a real thing. Engines cough to life on the test, stand at regular times. Tow tractors pull airframes through the curve in steady arcs. At peak, one B-24 clears the door as the next one noses into the first station every 63 minutes. He feels the risk has not left. The war will not allow that. But he can see cause and effect reach all the way from a drilled hole at a bench to the shadow of a bomber rolling into sun. The promise he made becomes a rhythm the plant can keep, and that rhythm gives shape to 1,000 hands and the work of a nation that depends on them. Late in 1944, he sees the line keep its own time without his shadow on the floor, so he begins to pull his hands back. He writes thin books that explain each station in plain steps, with pictures of hands on tools and arrows that show which way a part should face. He lists the minutes for a job as a band, not a single number, so a foreman can slow the beat without guessing which task to stretch. He adds small rules in the margins. When the pace drops, recheck gauges, oil jigs, and swap drill bushings on a set count. He knows that people will leave as fast as orders rise and fall, and memory will go with them. Therefore, the method must live on paper that anyone can read. When he resigns in 1944, the system he built stands like a machine that no longer needs him at the switch. He no longer walks the curve, so he asks for the reports that used to sit in his pocket. He reads acceptance rates, scrap by station, number of red tags closed in a day, time to first pass on the ramp. He looks for slopes rather than points. A rise in fuel leaks tells him a tool is dull or a sealant has aged. A sudden drop in mate time says the new locator pins he signed months ago have reached the floor. Because he cannot lean on a bench and ask a man to show him a hole, he uses the numbers as his eyes, and the numbers still tie back to cards and gauges he drew. As winter turns and Europe nears victory in early 1945, orders ease. The danger shifts from failure to deliver to waste by habit. He had planned for this when he wrote the books. He designed a throttle into the line. If the beat slows, upstream shops drop every third cart into a maintenance bay, not onto storage racks. The next hour is spent truing masters and checking go-no-go gauges against their steel limits. He sets rules that some hands move to the school on slower days to teach and learn second and third jobs, so that when men go home or are let go, the line does not lose whole skills. Because time opens, he spends it on things that do not show on a day's tally but preserve a month's health. He writes one more set of pages before he steps all the way away. These are not about build, but stop. Do not start a fuselage that cannot be finished inside the known contract. Keep buffers thin so parked parts cannot hide a changed order. Tie each station start to a stamped card from inspection and a signed pull from stores, so no one can hoard kits against a rumor. He adds a clear end state for every plane that is in flow if a stop comes. Finish it to the next test point, clear it, and do not begin another. The last risk he sees is overbuilding after victory because momentum is a kind of pride. Therefore he pins a brake to the pride before he leaves. Through the spring he watches the plant from a distance that he chose. He tracks how the acceptance rate holds high while daily output bends down, and he reads the notes that show more hours spent on fixture care and school. The beat moves from production to preservation, because the method he wrote allows it to shift without losing shape. He sees a small rise in scrap when a vendor's last batch of skins arrives with a lot number that fails the change board rule, and he is glad the paper he demanded makes it a quick refusal instead of a quiet fit-up at the line. He can feel that the same choices that drove speed now protect restraint. On the 15th of August, 1945, radios say Japan has surrendered. He hears the whistles and the voices in the streets, and he thinks of how the beat links to that sound. The next day, a stop order reaches the plant. The rule he wrote turns a page into motion. Tow bars stay on the floor. Clocks at stations run down and are not reset. Work cards that would have left stores do not move, because they need the stamp that no longer comes. Men and women unbolt jigs from their last part and set the steel on cribbing for the first time since they were installed. Air hoses hiss, then fall quiet. The curved path he drew holds still under the lights, and he knows that this silence is not failure but the point. The job was to make enough and no more, and the stop prevents the last mistake. Official letters follow the order. Contracts close with numbers and signatures. Property tags are counted against ledger lines. Jigs that were once masters of shape are measured, labeled, and set aside for disposal or storage. Engines in paint-stenciled crates are matched to serials, released, or returned. Inventory that cannot meet a peacetime rule is sold as scrap under notices with dates and names at the bottom. He reads the notices and sees a legal end to the flow he designed. The war's rules end on paper as they do in the aisles. Because the stop is formal, no one has to argue at a gate about finishing just one more, and waste does not creep past victory under a good excuse. People leave in waves. Some go back to farms and mines. Others walk into different plants and carry small things with them. The habit of timing a job before changing it, the use of gauges that tell a truth in one look, the clean separation of build steps so errors have nowhere to hide. He sees those signs in brochures for peacetime goods and in job ads that ask for experience with flow lines and fixtures. The method he broke into cards and minutes outlasts the planes it built. Because the books were simple, the ideas spread without him needing to argue them in a room. He keeps one picture for himself. It is not of a bomber in sun, but of the curve under bright lights when the beat was right, and a fuselage moved while a wing rolled into place at the far end. He knows that line could start again if called, because it is an idea as much as a floor plan, and ideas travel with people and tools. When the plant goes still after the stop order, the quiet carries weight he can feel in his chest. He understands that the last risk has been resolved, and the waste he feared did not come. His method turns into a wider language that others now speak, and his own fate, stepping back from a machine he made, fits the larger turn from war to work that follows. An airplane learned to move like a car because he forced single flow, fixed minutes, and mastered jigs into every step. From that came a floor that balanced itself, killed defects early, and followed rules tied to time instead of rank. And the simple cards, clean gauges, and training he wrote walked with workers to other lines. The day after the 15th of August, 1945, the curve he drew stood silent, tow bars on the floor, clocks unwound, air gone from the hoses. And in that quiet he knew the task was finished, while his footsteps fading from Willow Run turned into the wider hum of post-war factories that kept his rhythm long after the line stopped.